I'm so pleased to have Jocelyn Benson, Secretary of State of Michigan, joining us here at Techonomy's Digitally United Conference. We have met Secretary Benson before the election. Also, Techonomy, she was at a session we did. Also, Techonomy first met her some years ago when she was Dean of the Law School at Wayne State University. So we're very pleased to still be working with her, especially now that she has become such a hero of democracy, which is one of the main reasons we want to have her here. So thank you so much, Jocelyn, for being here. You really have gone through the ringer this year. Maybe you could start by just talking about how you reflect on the experience of defending democracy that you've essentially just been through, and what you see as the big picture lessons from that.
I think the biggest, well, first of all, hi, I think this is my fourth Techon, right? I think my first Techonomy was almost 10 years ago, or like 2013 with Andrew Yang in Detroit.
In Detroit, yes.
Panel, which was great. And then great photos came out of that circulated when he ran for president, which was funny to see. And then there was an Arizona one. So I'm a longtime friend of, and really grateful and appreciative for what you do to really bring technology into everything, which is really what we need to be doing. And, that's part of the answer to your question of, how we preserve democracy, how we continue to modernize it, really finding ways to build partnerships with various different industries, including the tech industry, so that we can collectively utilize all of our respective tools and innovations to make voting work for everyone. So a lot of my work as Secretary of State has been trying to explore those partnerships. I often say democracy is a team sport, because it does require all of us working together to protect everyone's voices and everyone's vote. And that's really what 2020 demonstrated so well and so powerfully. I mean, truly, if we didn't have partnerships at every level with various different industries, from businesses who gave their employees the day off so that they could serve as poll workers, or sports teams who worked to counter misinformation through the More Than a Vote effort that LeBron James led, and provided also polling places for us to host voting sites throughout the country. There are lots of different ways in which everyone stepped up this year. And what all of that underscores is that it's up to all of us to make sure democracy prevails. And the only reason it did wasn't because of anything I did alone. It was because of what we all did together to protect and preserve the process. But what that also tells us is that if we don't remain vigilant in the future, the forces that do want to dismantle democracy will grow in power. And that's what I'm most concerned about moving forward, that the election of 2020 is behind us, but the battle over the future of democracy is escalating. And so we have to stay on top of that and vigilant and proactive, even though many of us, myself included, are kind of like wishing we could take a moment after getting through the last election, but we can't. Democracy requires us to keep fighting.
Well, this issue of what to expect next, I think, is probably the central thing I wanted to hear you talk about. Yeah. I'm a little worried or disturbed to hear that you're still worried, because you were in so much the thick of it. You were personally targeted. Your state was a pivot state in the entire national election. It was targeted for all kinds of attacks, personally and just generally, for you and the governor. So, well, why don't you just continue talking about where you see us headed from here and what we need to do, and any element that technology can help to address those issues. Feel free to throw in, and I'll pursue that separately also.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that different partnerships can bring to bear on protecting everyone's vote. I think it sort of starts by two pieces of alignment. One, working with the same set of facts and data, and allowing those facts and data to drive our actions and inform what we do. And secondly, to be informed by a sort of overarching principle that we need an informed and engaged electorate and an election infrastructure that's accessible and secure. So that's sort of the framework. And then we move forward from there, finding different pieces in the framework where we're needed to lean in. For example, as I mentioned, with the battles over democracy escalating, this new battlefront has emerged in state legislatures. And state legislatures all across the country are starting to roll back or even try to eliminate the very policies that voters embraced and worked so well in making 2020 such a secure and actually very successful election. And so one tangible thing that we all need everyone to do, but particularly those influential voices in other industries like the tech industry, is to tell lawmakers that you don't support this rollback. We see that actually now starting to be successful in Georgia, where companies like Delta and Coca-Cola are stepping up and saying, this isn't who we are as a country. And it really underscores how all of us have a voice in protecting democracy. And when democracy is under attack, we all need to find ways to use our voices to influence decision makers and make sure that, again, we use facts and data to protect the accuracy and security of democracy and help our voters become informed and engaged.
Yeah, we were very proud to see that our good friend Mark Benioff at Salesforce was the first major company to step up in Georgia and say, we absolutely oppose the bill that's being proposed. And there has been some equivocation by some of those big global companies that are based in Atlanta and Georgia, and I guess they're moving in the right direction. You know, one of the things that was so interesting about your response to the uproar after the election was your determined and adamant insistence that it was a fairly conducted and counted election, that you were certain of that. Talk about how you knew that, and to the degree that technology helped you say that so authoritatively.
I think it just got back to facts and data. That's what I was so adamant about, making sure people knew the truth. And especially with this onslaught of misinformation and people lying to serve a political agenda or try to maintain the semblance of power or influence, to just repeat the truth and the facts in all different ways with multiple messengers was really the essence of my work from the moment the polls closed until we finished our work and the certification process. But we saw even again the need, and we still even just now I'm still working to make sure people know the truth. But the adamancy comes from just wanting people to know the truth and also finding ways to improve the system and collaborative ways to do that. I think what we saw, and this is really where we need, I think, again, support and partnerships, but there's really kind of three pillars to running the election to our success and moving forward. The first is the election infrastructure. The second is educating voters about that infrastructure, their options for voting, their ways to be assured that it's secure. And then the third is election security. And again, the biggest threat to election security is really the growth of misinformation about everything else. And so there's touch points in which the tech industry can be supportive, or anyone can be supportive on all three of those things. And really, we saw that involvement in 2020, and it helped lead to our success. Certainly, increasing the security and accuracy of our voting technology is key to that infrastructure piece. But also, secondly, finding creative ways to communicate to people, messages around their options to vote, even in the midst of a pandemic. Technology was key in enabling us to make it easy for people to request to vote from home without having to leave their home. And then third, obviously, combating misinformation. There's lots of different ways in which social media has been really a focal point, both for the dissemination and hopefully also for the countering of misinformation. But all three of those areas require support and investment. And there's different touch points, again, that various industries, including the tech industry, can be influential in all of them.
When you look at social media in particular, on balance, would you say it has been a help or a hindrance?
It's hard to say, because I mean, certainly it has been the most prolific way that misinformation has spread. Without that, I don't, and there's other ways, but the other piece of that is it's so public that enables us to find out what the misinformation is and counter it. So, I think the way I look at it is social media is part of the ecosystem. It's not going anywhere. And so the question is, how do we use that and integrate that as a medium for all three of those things, particularly on the voter education piece, though, but also countering misinformation and helping to, provide ways to for people to, request information information about how to register to vote and things like that, and have access to the election infrastructure. So it's all about using the tools at our disposal and finding a way to make them work. But of course, it's not been without its challenges, given the proliferation of misinformation. And I will say, like probably most of the rest of the world, it is a new day. A new day has dawned in the months since the former president hasn't had access to social media as in the past. Certainly, as someone who is a frequent target of his tweets in particular, it does give you a lot more time in your day, at the very least.
Yeah.
The work that you're elected to do when you don't have to kind of get engaged in high profile, Twitter spats.
Does that concrete thing, keeping Trump off Twitter and Facebook, make you safer personally?
Yes, not completely, because there are still, and we see this in politics as well, there's still proliferations, but the fact that you don't have one of the loudest voices in that medium saying really unabashedly untrue things, and then having to respond in a way that cuts through, has been an element of the temperature decreasing and things cooling off a little bit over the past few months.
How, if I could ask you, how did it feel that you were personally targeted, that you were singled out, your house was surrounded, I think at one point, I mean, horrible stuff. And yet I saw you on TV repeatedly during that time, surprisingly forthright, and I'm sure it was hair-raising, but talk a little bit about what that was like for you.
I think it was challenging, obviously. It was very difficult, but I was always quickly to know two things. One, the attacks on me weren't attacking me. They were attacking our voters. They were attacking democracy. And I've devoted my whole life to defending our voters and democracy. And so I just thought about that, realized that, and really, connected to those both presently and historically who've similarly faced threats. I mean, threats over people trying to expand access to the vote are nothing new, unfortunately, in our country. And I signed up in my career to fight those threats, to increase and protect access to the vote. And this was an extension of that. So that was really the first and foremost. And I think secondly, in that role, I had an important megaphone, or perhaps platform, that I was very intentional about using to make sure that voters knew that they would be protected, that I was going to work with everyone on both sides of the aisle to make sure their votes, no matter who they voted for or how they voted, would be heard and would be counted. And so I simply just didn't focus on the noise, shifted my focus to those who were ultimately essentially the ones under attack, and saying, don't worry, you're protected.
Well, I must say your aplomb in that scenario was inspirational and, almost heroic. So thank you. One thing you referred to, sort of the ongoing challenges or the ongoing idea war, maybe, or information battle. Could you just describe where that stands now? And, is it trailing off or not?
No, it's not. It's escalating. And I think it's just shifted to the battlefront of state legislatures. We now have a scenario where in 43 states and more growing, I anticipate there will be more. We've seen at least 250 pieces of legislation introduced, the bulk of which were in the states also that were under the microscope and spotlight: Arizona, Georgia, states that don't have a Democratic governor, quite frankly, and so you're seeing legislation that's seeking to eliminate the very things that worked in our election. Things like drop boxes, for secure drop boxes for people to return ballots because the postal service was unreliable. Things like just the ability to vote from home so that people didn't have to risk their health and stand in line to vote in person. All of these things that were bipartisan policies that we worked so hard to put in place and successfully implemented in 2020 to carry off a massive turnout election in the midst of a pandemic that was secure. now the legislatures are trying, every piece of legislation is trying to roll that back in a way that's going to make voting more difficult and less secure. And so it's incredibly disheartening. And what it tells me is that, again, the 2020 election is behind us, but there's another one coming up in 22, and there's another presidential in 24. And every indicator I'm seeing is to expect and prepare for the attacks we saw in 20 to escalate and emerge again in different forms, but still in pernicious ways in 22 and in 24 and beyond, which again just calls on all of us to be prepared to stay vigilant.
Disturbing to hear, but thank you for that. I know that you talk a lot to other secretaries of state and other Democratic Party leaders nationwide. How would you characterize the mood? I mean, is the way you just spoke about it the way they are all feeling? Is there a collective sense of anxiety, worry, or determined optimism? I mean, give us a sense of what you're feeling on the more macro level at nationally.
I mean, I think there's a sense of exhaustion. There's a lot of division where there hasn't been before, because everyone had different experiences. And I think there's, 5 or 6 of us, Barbara Sagafsky in Nevada, Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, Katie Hobbs in Arizona, myself, and the leadership in Pennsylvania, where we had a very unique and quite challenging experience together, and we were in very close contact with each other throughout to kind of support each other. But there's just kind of a disconnect because not everyone had those experiences, and so you're seeing a little bit more partisanship, a little bit more tension emerge than we've in the past.
You mean as a group of secretaries of state when you talk together?
Yeah, but I think that's really a reflection of how a lot of the country feels right now, right? We've just been through a very significant, tumultuous time and battle over democracy. And yes, democracy prevailed. We're also going through the pandemic. We're also going through the economic crisis, the social justice crises. So there's a lot of stuff that's affecting society right now. That's reflecting itself in among other election administrators. But more than anything else, there is, I think, a deep pride and a sense of accomplishment that one way or the other, we got through this, and we did see a very successful election in the midst of a pandemic that was secure. And I think there's a emerging recognition that the work is going to continue, and that we have much more, even if we disagree about how many drop boxes should be in a county, we've got a lot more to gain in collaborating and learning from each other than we do, in not doing that. And so I see us continuing to find ways to collaborate and listen to each other in the future. And right after this, I'm off to do an event with Brad Raffensperger where we're going to talk about the same thing. So I think the collaboration is going to continue, but it's a little frayed right now, just I think by virtue of the fact that we've all just been through so much over the past year.
Yes, well, and it's somewhat encouraging that you're in good touch with Brad Raffensperger, who himself has proven to be something of a hero of this scenario. When we had you on in the fall, some weeks, month or so before the election, one of the things you were concerned about was cyber attacks on the election infrastructure. Did that prove to be a problem? Did the coordination with the federal government help? Just quickly talk about how that played out.
Yeah, we saw, and there was actually just a report this week from the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security and CISA, the multi-collaborative effort of the federal government around cybersecurity, that affirmed essentially that there were several foreign attempts to interfere, and that none were successful. And then indeed, this was a very secure election. And so, that's the essence of it. And that's what we'll continue to see moving forward. And indeed, that collaboration was key. We basically did everything we were supposed to do. We've all followed all the best practices on cybersecurity, and it worked. And notably, as we talked about then, there was this there was a confidence that we were on it and we were prepared, and that we were sharing information and just everything you're supposed to be doing. We were doing, thanks to the leadership of Chris Krebs and Matt Masterson and the federal government, and of course, local and state officials as well. But then, we were concerned that would people really know, or would people still believe misinformation about insecure elections? And notably, there was the debate isn't over. That I should say the attack of misinformation was not focused on that, was not focused on cybersecurity or spreading misinformation about that. It shifted to a focus on just election procedures and election administrators, and which is notable. So the misinformation that we anticipated percolating came, just not in a form of an attack or misinformation about cybersecurity. And then, of course, it was very helpful that after the election, we had this joint statement come out from the secretaries of state as well as the federal government saying, indeed, this was a secure election. So we got through that, and we'll continue to, we've got a good infrastructure in place to protect the cybersecurity of the process. It's all the other stuff that we found that we need to also protect.
Well, we're running out of time, and I want to make sure I end by asking you, since our theme in this event is unity, personally, big picture, how optimistic you are that we're heading in that long-term big picture direction. But before we get to that, one thing you have to talk about is the extraordinary redistricting effort that's underway in Michigan, which you're overseeing and such an integral part of. Because I think people from outside of Michigan will be very heartened to hear that that kind of thing is going on. So if you could just quickly describe that.
Yeah, we have, we're the second state in the country to have an independent citizens redistricting commission. And what that is 13 citizens that have been randomly selected from nearly 10,000 who applied, and 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 5 independents. And they're meeting every Thursday. You can follow and track their progress at michiganredistricting.org. To prepare and to ultimately draw with citizen input districts for all across the state, whether it's state house, state senate, or Congress. All of those districts will be drawn once we get the census data later this year, and redrawn by citizens, not elected officials. So this will end gerrymandering in the state of Michigan. And we hope to show that this is something that can be replicated in any state in this country. And it's something that citizens embrace. And citizens, when given the opportunity to draw their own districts, they can do it fairly, independently, transparently, and quite well without all of the political gerrymandering you see happen when legislatures do it. So it's a great thing, and it gives me a lot of optimism moving forward.
That is such an encouraging thing, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if other states are inspired by it. In fact, I expect that. So, okay, to the big picture, long term, you have a sense of optimism about that. About unity in the country, in the world, how do you feel at a macro level going forward?
I think it all depends on the individual choices that people make. Will you choose to be a part of protecting democracy, a part of promoting a civil society, a part of an engaged society, an innovative society? I mean, again, what this past year really showed us is not only how connected all of us are, and how ultimately, interconnected we can be, impacted by a global pandemic, by the economic crisis, and everything else we've endured. But if democracy is going to survive and thrive as it did in 2020, it is going to require good people of faith and good in both parties to protect the system, and for voters to do the same, to spread trusted and actual truthful information as opposed to misinformation. You needed a Brad Raffensperger in Georgia to stand up to pressure that we all saw, as all of us did stand up to pressure in different ways in our respective states. But we need everyone to join us. We need good people in positions of authority to protect the system. But really, the heroism we saw protecting democracy in 2020 succeeded. But it will only continue to succeed and give us a sense of optimism if people are there to protect it. And again, that's on all of us to play different roles. And there's, I assure you, there is a role for all of us to play in protecting democracy moving forward.
Well, as we said at the beginning, you've spoken to us a number of times over the years. If anything, you've gotten more eloquent during that time. So thank you so much. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, keep up the good work. Thank you for joining us and for helping us finish the program at Digitally United. Very much enjoyed it.
My pleasure. And I hope to see you in person again soon at the next economy that's in person, hopefully again soon.
It'll happen fairly soon, I hope. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon. Thanks, David.